The sound of coins clinking against the dirt made Fletcher Zimmerman pause mid-stride outside the general store in Provo, Utah Territory, on that scorching afternoon in July of 1878. He turned to see a young woman crouched beside a ragged family huddled in the shade of the wooden awning, pressing what looked like her last few coins into the trembling hands of a woman holding two small children. The young woman's dress, though clean and carefully mended, showed the wear of someone who had precious little herself. Yet there she was, emptying her small cloth purse without hesitation. Fletcher watched as she stood, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, and smiled at the family with such genuine warmth that something in his chest tightened. The grateful mother clutched the coins and whispered fervent thanks, while the young woman simply shook her head and said something too quiet for Fletcher to hear, before turning away. Her shoulders straightened with determination, despite the fact that she had just given away what was clearly money she needed herself. He found himself moving before he could think better of it, his boots striking the dusty boardwalk as he closed the distance between them. "Miss," he called out, his voice rougher than he intended. She turned, and Fletcher got his first clear look at her face. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with hazel eyes that held both kindness and a quiet strength. A few freckles dusted her nose, and there was a slight flush to her cheeks from the heat. She regarded him with cautious curiosity, her hand moving instinctively to smooth her simple cotton dress. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft but steady, with a hint of an accent he could not quite place. Fletcher removed his hat, suddenly aware of the trail dust covering his clothes and the fact that he probably looked as rough as the desert he had just crossed. "I saw what you did just now, giving those folks your money." Her expression immediately grew guarded, and she lifted her chin slightly. "That is my business, I believe." "It is," he agreed quickly, not wanting to offend her. "I only meant to say that your kindness deserves kindness back." She blinked, clearly surprised by his words. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to determine whether he was mocking her or sincere. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because her posture relaxed slightly. "That is generous of you to say, but I do not need anything in return. Those children needed food more than I do." Fletcher studied her more closely. Now that he was paying attention, he could see the telltale signs of someone stretching every penny. Her boots were worn thin at the soles, and her dress, while clean, had been let out and taken in multiple times based on the faint lines in the fabric. She was too thin, her wrists delicate where they emerged from her sleeves. "Have you eaten today?" he asked bluntly. Color flooded her cheeks. "I hardly think that is any of your concern, Mr. Zimmerman, Fletcher Zimmerman." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation she took it. Her grip was surprisingly firm despite her slender fingers. "Penelope Morrison," she said quietly. "Well, Miss Morrison, I am about to get myself some supper at the restaurant down the street, and I would be honored if you would join me. No strings attached, just one person sharing a meal with another." Penelope opened her mouth, clearly intending to refuse, but her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. The mortification on her face would have been amusing under different circumstances, but Fletcher kept his expression carefully neutral. "I really should not," she began, but Fletcher could see the hunger in her eyes warring with her pride. "Please," he said simply. "You did a kind thing, and I would like to do one in return. Besides, I hate eating alone, and I do not know a soul in this town besides you now." That seemed to tip the balance. Penelope bit her lip, glanced back at the family she had helped who were now disappearing around the corner, and then nodded slowly. "Very well. But only because you said the magic words about eating alone. I know how that feels." Fletcher felt an unexpected surge of pleasure at her acceptance. He offered her his arm, and after another moment of hesitation, she took it. They walked down the dusty main street of Provo together, past the saloon where tinny piano music drifted out, past the livery stable and the feed store, until they reached Mama Chen's restaurant, a surprisingly clean establishment run by a Chinese immigrant family. The interior was blessedly cool after the harsh sunlight, and Fletcher guided Penelope to a corner table near the window. She sat with careful grace, folding her hands in her lap while Fletcher took the seat across from her. A young Chinese woman approached with menus and water, and Fletcher noticed how Penelope smiled at her with the same genuine warmth she had shown the family outside the general store. "Thank you," Penelope said to the waitress, and Fletcher heard true gratitude in her voice, as if receiving a glass of water was a gift to be appreciated. They ordered simple meals: roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables and fresh bread. Fletcher asked for a pot of coffee and noticed how Penelope's eyes lit up at the mention of it. "I have not had real coffee in weeks," she admitted, then looked embarrassed by the confession. "I have been making do with chicory root. How long have you been in Provo?" Fletcher asked, genuinely curious about this woman who had captured his attention so thoroughly. 3 months, Penelope said, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden table. "I came from Pennsylvania after my mother passed. There was nothing left for me there, and I had always dreamed of seeing the West. I thought perhaps I could make a fresh start, find work as a teacher or a seamstress." "And have you found work, I mean?" Her expression grew troubled. "Some. I do mending and alterations for Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house where I rent a room. But it is not steady and the pay is not much. I have been looking for a teaching position, but the school here already has a teacher, and they are not looking for another." Fletcher nodded slowly, absorbing this information. "What made you give away your last coins then, if you do not mind my asking?" Penelope met his eyes directly, and he saw a flash of something fierce and determined there. "Because those children were hungry. I will find a way to manage, but those little ones should not have to go without food. Their father was injured in a mining accident last week, and the mining company refuses to help. The mother has been trying to find work, but no one will hire her with 2 small children in tow." She paused, then added quietly, "I know what it is like to be hungry and alone. I could not walk past them." The food arrived then, steaming and fragrant, and Fletcher watched as Penelope bowed her head for a brief, silent prayer before picking up her fork. She ate with careful dignity, not rushing despite her obvious hunger, and Fletcher found himself admiring her composure. "What about you, Mr. Zimmerman?" she asked after a few bites. "What brings you to Provo?" Fletcher considered his answer carefully. "I have been working cattle drives mostly, moving herds from Texas up to Wyoming and Montana. Hard work, but honest. I have saved up some money, and I am looking to settle down somewhere, maybe start my own ranch or business. I have been traveling through Utah, seeing what opportunities might be available." "That sounds like a good plan," Penelope said. "Do you have family waiting for you somewhere?" "No," Fletcher said, the single word carrying more weight than he intended. "My parents died when I was young. I was raised by my uncle on a ranch in Texas, but he passed 2 years ago, left me a bit of money which I have been adding to with cattle work. I suppose I have been looking for a place to belong." Something in Penelope's expression softened. "I understand that feeling. After my mother died, I felt so adrift. Pennsylvania was home, but it did not feel like home anymore, if that makes sense. Everything reminded me of what I had lost. Coming west felt like a chance to build something new." They continued talking as they ate, the conversation flowing more easily than Fletcher would have expected with someone he had just met. Penelope told him about her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, about her mother's work as a seamstress, and how she had learned the trade from her. She spoke of her journey west, the long train ride and then the stage coach to Provo, the wonder she had felt seeing the mountains for the first time. Fletcher found himself sharing more than he usually did, telling her about life on the cattle drives, the beauty and brutality of the open range, the loyalty among the cowboys, and the occasional violence they encountered. He told her about his uncle's ranch, about learning to ride and rope and brand, about the satisfaction of honest work well done. By the time they finished eating and were lingering over their coffee, Fletcher realized that the sun had begun to set, painting the sky visible through the window in shades of orange and gold. He also realized that he had not enjoyed an evening this much in years. "I should get back to the boarding house," Penelope said reluctantly. "Mrs. Henderson does not like her tenants coming in too late, even though I am 23 years old and perfectly capable of managing my own time." Fletcher stood quickly, pulling out her chair. "May I walk you back?" Penelope hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." Fletcher paid for their meals, waving off Penelope's protests, and they stepped back out into the cooling evening air. Provo was settling into twilight, lamps being lit in windows, the sounds of the day fading into the quieter rhythms of night. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to end the evening. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure on a side street, respectable but clearly catering to those with limited means. Fletcher walked Penelope to the front steps and stopped, turning to face her. "Thank you for joining me for supper," he said. "I truly did hate the thought of eating alone, and your company made the evening something special." Penelope smiled, and even in the fading light, Fletcher could see the warmth in her expression. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Zimmerman. You did not have to do what you did, but I am grateful for it." "Fletcher," he said, "please call me Fletcher." "Then you must call me Penelope." They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Fletcher cleared his throat. "Would you allow me to call on you again?" "Perhaps we could take a walk tomorrow afternoon if you are free." Penelope's smile widened. "I would like that very much, Fletcher." He tipped his hat to her, and she climbed the steps to the front door. Before going inside, she turned back and gave him a little wave. Fletcher stood there long after the door had closed behind her, a strange warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the summer evening. The next morning found Fletcher at the land office, inquiring about available properties in the area. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, spread several maps across the counter and pointed out various parcels. "This one here," the clerk said, tapping a spot on the map, "is about 5 miles northeast of town. Good water access, decent grazing land, and a small cabin already on the property. Previous owner died without heirs, so it reverted to the territory. They are looking to sell it for a fair price." Fletcher studied the map carefully. The property was not large, maybe 160 acres, but it was a start. The price was within his means, though it would take most of his savings. Still, looking at that plot of land, he felt something settle inside him. This could be home. "I would like to see it," he said. The clerk nodded and arranged for Fletcher to ride out that afternoon after his walk with Penelope. Fletcher left the land office feeling more hopeful than he had in months. He found Penelope waiting for him outside the boarding house at the appointed time, wearing the same dress from the day before but with her hair arranged differently, pulled back with a simple ribbon. She looked lovely, and Fletcher told her so, making her blush. They walked through town, and then out along one of the roads leading into the surrounding countryside. The Wasatch Mountains rose dramatically to the east, their peaks still holding patches of snow despite the summer heat. Penelope exclaimed over the beauty of the landscape, and Fletcher found himself seeing it with fresh eyes through her obvious delight. "It is so different from Pennsylvania," she said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Everything there was green and close, trees everywhere. Here it feels like you can see forever. It is almost overwhelming. In a good way or a bad way. Good, she said decisively. Definitely good. It feels like anything is possible in a place this big. They walked and talked for over an hour, finding a comfortable rhythm together. Penelope asked him about the cattle drives, wanting to know details about the work, the places he had been, the people he had met. Fletcher found himself telling her stories he had not thought of in years, making her laugh with tales of Cowboy's mishaps and the strange characters encountered on the trail. In turn, Penelope told him more about her life in Pennsylvania, about the small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, about her mother's determination to give her daughter opportunities she never had. She spoke of learning not just sewing but also reading and writing and arithmetic, her mother scraping together money for books and lessons. "She wanted me to be a teacher," Penelope said softly. "She said that education was the key to real freedom, especially for women. She was so proud when I got my teaching certificate. I wish she could have lived to see me find a position." "I think she would be proud of you anyway," Fletcher said. "You came all this way on your own. You are making your way in a new place. That takes courage." Penelope looked at him with such gratitude that Fletcher felt that strange tightness in his chest again. He was falling for this woman, he realized with a start. It had only been a day, but something about Penelope Morrison had gotten under his skin in the best possible way. They turned back toward town as the afternoon grew late, and Fletcher reluctantly mentioned that he had an appointment to view a property. Penelope's face lit up with interest. "You are really thinking of settling here?" "I am," he confirmed. "I saw a piece of land this morning that sounds promising. I am going to ride out and take a look at it shortly." "That is wonderful," Penelope said warmly. "I hope it is everything you are looking for." Fletcher walked her back to the boarding house, and before she went inside, he gathered his courage. "Penelope, would you have supper with me again tonight? I know it is forward of me, but I find I am not ready to say goodbye to your company just yet." Her smile was all the answer he needed before she even spoke. "Yes, I would like that." The property exceeded Fletcher's expectations. The cabin was small but solidly built, with a stone fireplace and good bones despite needing some repairs. The land itself was beautiful, a mix of meadow and scrubland with a clear stream running through it and the mountains as a dramatic backdrop. Standing there in the cooling afternoon, Fletcher could picture it all. Cattle grazing in the meadow, the cabin expanded and improved, maybe a barn and corrals built near the stream. And suddenly, unexpectedly, he could picture Penelope there too. Penelope in the doorway of the cabin, Penelope walking beside him across the meadow, Penelope sitting with him on the porch in the evenings watching the sun set behind the mountains. The thought should have terrified him. He had known her for barely 24 hours. But instead of fear, he felt certainty settling deep in his bones. This land, this place, this woman. They all fit together somehow in a way that made perfect sense even though it defied logic. He rode back to town and went straight to the land office. "I will take it," he told the clerk. "Draw up the papers." That evening, over supper at Mama Chen's again, Fletcher told Penelope about the property, his words tumbling out in an uncharacteristic rush of enthusiasm. She listened with rapt attention, asking questions about the land and the cabin, her eyes shining. "It sounds perfect," she said. "I am so happy for you, Fletcher. You deserve a place to call home. Would you like to see it?" The words came out before Fletcher could second-guess himself. "I could rent a buggy tomorrow, take you out there. I would value your opinion on the place." Penelope's expression grew uncertain. "I am not sure that would be entirely proper, me going out there alone with you. We could ask Mrs. Henderson to come along as a chaperone," Fletcher suggested quickly, though the thought of that stern woman's presence dampened his enthusiasm. But Penelope laughed, a clear, bright sound. "No, I think Mrs. Henderson would refuse on principle. But you know what? I am a grown woman and I can make my own decisions. Yes, I would love to see your land, Fletcher. Propriety can take care of itself for once." Fletcher grinned, delighted by her spirit. They made plans to ride out the next morning, and Fletcher found himself counting the hours until he would see her again. True to her word, Penelope was ready when he arrived with the rented buggy. She had packed a basket with food, explaining that she had woken early to help Mrs. Henderson with breakfast in exchange for being allowed to take some provisions. She wore the same dress again, but Fletcher was beginning to recognize it as likely her only good dress, and he felt a fierce desire to change that, to make sure she never had to give away her last coins again, to see her comfortable and secure. The drive out to the property took about an hour, and they filled it with easy conversation. Penelope exclaimed over the scenery, pointing out wildflowers and birds, asking Fletcher their names when he knew them. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Fletcher found himself seeing the landscape with new appreciation. When they arrived at the property, Fletcher helped Penelope down from the buggy and watched her reaction carefully. She stood silent for a long moment, just taking it all in. The cabin, the meadow, the stream, the mountains rising beyond. Then she turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Fletcher, it is beautiful. It is absolutely beautiful." Relief and pleasure flooded through him. "You really think so?" "How could I not? Look at this place. It is like something from a dream." She walked toward the cabin and Fletcher followed, trying to see it through her eyes. "May I look inside?" The cabin was dusty and clearly had not been occupied in some time, but Penelope moved through it with obvious delight, pointing out the good features and possibilities. "This fireplace is wonderful, and look at these windows. With some curtains and care, this would be so cozy. And the bones of the place are solid. You can tell it was built by someone who knew what they were doing." She moved to the window that looked out toward the mountains and stood there quietly. Fletcher came to stand beside her, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "I can see why you want this place," she said softly. "There is something peaceful about it, like you could build a real life here." "That is exactly what I thought," Fletcher said. His heart was pounding, and he knew he was about to take a risk, but he could not seem to stop himself. "Penelope, I know we have only known each other for 2 days. I know this is going to sound crazy, but standing here with you, I can see it all. Not just the ranch I want to build, but the life I want to live, and I cannot seem to picture that life without you in it." Penelope turned to face him, her hazel eyes wide. "Fletcher, I am not asking you to marry me right this second," he said quickly. "I know that would be absurd. But I am asking if you would let me court you properly. If you would give me the chance to prove that what I am feeling is real. Because, Penelope, I have never felt anything like this before. When I saw you giving away those coins, I saw your heart. And I knew right then that you were someone special." Penelope's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I have been trying to tell myself I am being foolish, that I cannot possibly feel this way about someone I just met. But Fletcher, when I am with you, everything just feels right, like I have finally found where I am supposed to be." Fletcher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand in his. "Then let me court you properly. Let me show you that this is real." "Yes," Penelope said simply. "Yes, I would like that very much." They stood there in the dusty cabin holding hands, and Fletcher felt like his heart might burst from the happiness flooding through him. Then Penelope laughed, breaking the intensity of the moment. "We should eat the food I brought before it spoils in this heat," she said practically, but her eyes were still soft as she looked at him. They spread a blanket in the shade near the stream and unpacked the basket. Penelope had brought bread and cheese and apples, simple fare but carefully prepared. They ate and talked, making plans. Fletcher told her about his vision for the property, how he wanted to start with a small herd of cattle, maybe some horses. Penelope listened and offered suggestions, practical insights that showed her intelligence and common sense. "You will need help," she said. "Building the ranch, running it, that is too much for one person." "I know," Fletcher agreed. "I am hoping to hire a hand or two, men I can trust. I know some fellows from the cattle drives who might be looking for steady work." As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly packed up and headed back to town. But this time, Fletcher held Penelope's hand openly as he drove the buggy, and she leaned slightly against his shoulder, both of them content in the comfortable silence. Over the following weeks, Fletcher and Penelope were inseparable when her work permitted. Fletcher completed the purchase of the property and began the work of turning it into a functioning ranch. He hired 2 men he had worked with before, reliable fellows named Tommy and Pete, who were grateful for steady employment. Together, they began repairing the cabin, building a barn, and setting up corrals. Penelope visited every Sunday, her one full day off from her work at the boarding house. She brought food and helped clean the cabin, making curtains for the windows and giving advice on where things should go. The place began to feel like a home with her touch on it, and Fletcher fell more in love with her each time he saw her. He courted her properly, as he had promised. He took her to church on Sundays, sat with her at socials, and walked her home every evening he was in town. He brought her small gifts when he could: wildflowers from the property, a pretty hair ribbon he saw in the general store, a used book of poetry he found and thought she might enjoy. Penelope, in turn, mended his clothes without being asked, packed him food for his long days at the ranch, and listened with genuine interest as he talked about his work and his plans. She shared her own dreams too, her hope of someday teaching, her love of reading and learning, her desire to build a life that mattered. They fell into a rhythm that felt natural and right, despite the unusual speed of their courtship. The people of Provo began to accept them as a couple, nodding to them on the street, including them both in invitations. Mrs. Henderson even softened slightly, though she maintained her stern demeanor in principle. One evening in late August, as they sat on the steps of the boarding house watching the stars come out, Fletcher decided it was time. He had known since that first day what he wanted, and the weeks since had only confirmed it. He loved Penelope Morrison with an intensity that still surprised him, but which felt as solid and real as the land he now owned. "Penelope," he said, turning to face her fully, "I need to ask you something." She looked at him, and by the lamplight spilling from the boarding house windows, he could see her smile. "Yes, Fletcher." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. It was plain wood, nothing fancy, but inside was the ring he had spent his last spare money on, a simple gold band with a small but genuine ruby. He had chosen the ruby because it reminded him of her hair catching the sunlight that first day. "Penelope Morrison, I know I said I was not asking you to marry me right away, but I cannot wait any longer. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. You make everything better. You make me want to be better. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Penelope's hands flew to her mouth, and tears spilled down her cheeks. "Oh, Fletcher, yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Fletcher opened the box with shaking hands and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and the ruby glowed warmly in the lamplight. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time, a sweet, gentle kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Penelope laughed through her tears. "I love you too, Fletcher Zimmerman. I have loved you since that first day when you saw me give away those coins and decided to show me kindness in return. You have the best heart of anyone I have ever known." They sat together on those steps until Mrs. Henderson came to the door and cleared her throat meaningfully. Fletcher said good night reluctantly, but not before they had agreed to marry as soon as it could be arranged. Neither of them saw the point in a long engagement when they were both certain of what they wanted. The wedding took place 3 weeks later at the small church in Provo. It was a simple affair, as neither Fletcher nor Penelope had much family or many resources. But what it lacked in grandeur, it made up for in genuine warmth. Tommy and Pete served as Fletcher's witnesses, clearly pleased to see their boss so happy. Mrs. Henderson grudgingly served as Penelope's attendant, though Fletcher suspected the old woman was more affected by the occasion than she let on. Penelope wore a new dress, the first new dress she had owned in years. Fletcher had insisted on buying it for her, taking her to the dressmaker and telling her to choose whatever she wanted. She had selected a simple design in cream-colored cotton with delicate blue embroidery at the collar and cuffs. With her hair arranged in soft curls and her face glowing with happiness, Fletcher thought she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Fletcher kissed his bride, he felt a sense of rightness settle over him. This was where he was meant to be, with this woman by his side. They had a small celebration afterward at Mama Chen's, the restaurant owner having offered to host a wedding supper as her gift to them. The food was plentiful and delicious, and the small group of guests toasted the newlyweds with sincere good wishes. Even some of the people Penelope had helped with her kindness came to offer their congratulations, including the mother and children who had received Penelope's last coins. The mother had tears in her eyes as she blessed the couple, and Penelope hugged her warmly. As the evening wound down, Fletcher loaded Penelope's few possessions into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. She said goodbye to Mrs. Henderson, thanking her for her help, and then Fletcher helped his wife up onto the wagon seat. Wife. The word filled him with wonder. They drove out to the ranch in the gathering darkness, the stars beginning to emerge overhead. Penelope sat close to Fletcher, her hand in his, and neither of them talked much. There did not seem to be a need for words. When they arrived at the cabin, Fletcher carried Penelope over the threshold, making her laugh with delight. He set her down gently and lit the lamps, revealing the work he had done to prepare the place for her arrival. The floors were swept clean, the furniture polished, fresh linens on the bed. He had even put wildflowers in a jar on the table. Penelope looked around with shining eyes. "Oh, Fletcher, you did all this for me, for us," he corrected gently. "This is our home now, Penelope, yours and mine together." She turned to him, and he saw in her face everything he felt reflected back: love, joy, hope for the future. They came together in a kiss that was deeper than the one at the church, full of promise and new beginning. And that night, in their cabin with the stream murmuring outside and the mountains standing guard over them, they began their life together in truth. The next months passed in a blur of hard work and deep contentment. Fletcher and his hired hands worked from dawn to dusk, building up the ranch. They purchased a small herd of cattle and some horses, constructed additional outbuildings, and improved the irrigation from the stream. It was grueling work, but Fletcher tackled it with renewed energy, driven by his desire to build something lasting for Penelope and himself. Penelope proved to be everything Fletcher could have hoped for in a partner. She worked as hard as he did, tending a large vegetable garden, keeping the house, and helping with the ranch work when needed. She learned to cook over the fireplace, experimenting with recipes and laughing at her failures. She made cheese and butter, preserved vegetables for the winter, and even helped with the livestock when Tommy and Pete needed an extra hand. But she also brought grace and beauty to their rough existence. She sang while she worked, filling the cabin with music. She read to Fletcher in the evenings from the few books they owned, her voice bringing stories to life. She made their cabin a true home with her touches. Embroidered pillows, braided rugs, curtains that caught the breeze, dried flowers hanging from the beams. They fell into rhythms together, learning each other's habits and preferences. Fletcher discovered that Penelope was cheerful in the mornings, often waking before dawn to watch the sunrise. He learned that she was ticklish on her left side but not her right, that she loved thunderstorms but was afraid of spiders, that she dreamed of someday having a piano though she had never learned to play one. Penelope learned that Fletcher was quieter in the mornings, preferring to wake slowly with his coffee. She discovered that he had a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and soft words. She learned that he sometimes woke from nightmares about a violent cattle drive incident he rarely spoke of, and she learned to hold him through them without asking questions he was not ready to answer. They quarreled occasionally, as all couples do. Penelope thought Fletcher took too many risks with his own safety. Fletcher worried that Penelope worked too hard and did not rest enough. But they learned quickly to talk through their disagreements, to listen to each other's concerns, and to always end their arguments with renewed understanding and affection. That first winter was hard. The snows came early and heavy, isolating them for weeks at a time. The cattle needed constant care, and Fletcher and the hands spent long, freezing hours breaking ice on the stream and hauling hay. Penelope kept the cabin warm and had hot food ready whenever the men came in from the cold. She also insisted they bring Tommy and Pete into the cabin during the worst of the storms, refusing to let them stay in the bunkhouse when the temperatures dropped dangerously low. During those long winter nights, with the world buried in snow outside, Fletcher and Penelope grew even closer. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams, learning the depths of each other. They played simple games, read aloud to each other, and made plans for the spring. And they discovered the profound intimacy that comes from weathering hardship together, from relying on each other completely. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it warmth and the promise of new growth, Penelope had news that filled Fletcher with a joy he had never imagined possible. She was pregnant, expecting their first child in the early autumn. Fletcher's reaction was everything Penelope could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, his face alight with happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "You are giving me a family, Penelope. A real family." The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope was often sick in the early months, and the summer heat made her uncomfortable as she grew larger. But she never complained, meeting each challenge with the same quiet strength Fletcher had first admired in her. Fletcher, for his part, was impossibly tender with her, insisting she rest more, taking on tasks she normally handled, worrying over her constantly. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Penelope would say with amused exasperation when his hovering became too much. But Fletcher could see she was pleased by his concern, even when she scolded him for it. Tommy and Pete were quietly pleased about the coming baby, preparing the barn and corrals for winter with extra diligence so Fletcher could spend more time near the house as Penelope's time drew closer. They treated Penelope with courtly respect, removing their hats whenever she appeared and thanking her profusely for every meal she prepared. In September, as the aspens on the mountainsides began turning gold, Penelope went into labor. Fletcher sent Pete racing into town for the doctor and the midwife, while Tommy stayed to help however he could. Fletcher held Penelope's hand through the long hours, awed by her strength and frightened by her pain. "I am fine," she kept assuring him between contractions, even managing to smile. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I am fine." But Fletcher had never felt so helpless in his life. All his strength, all his capability with physical work meant nothing in the face of this. All he could do was be there, hold her hand, wipe her forehead with cool water, and tell her he loved her over and over again. The midwife arrived just as sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, and she shooed Fletcher out of the cabin with firm instructions to wait outside. He paced the yard like a caged animal, listening to the sounds coming from inside, praying harder than he ever had in his life. It was full dark when he finally heard the thin, wavering cry of a newborn. Fletcher froze, his heart pounding. A moment later, the midwife appeared in the doorway, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Zimmerman, a healthy baby boy, and your wife is tired but well. Come meet your child." Fletcher stumbled into the cabin on shaking legs. Penelope lay in their bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. And in her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the tiniest person Fletcher had ever seen. His son. "Come here," Penelope whispered, and Fletcher moved to the bedside as if in a dream. She shifted the bundle so he could see the baby's face properly. Impossibly small features, eyes squeezed shut, a miniature fist waving beside a round cheek. "He is perfect," Fletcher breathed, reaching out with one finger to touch that tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately closed around Fletcher's finger, and something in Fletcher's chest cracked wide open. This was his son, his child, his family. "We are calling him Thomas," Penelope said softly. "After your uncle who raised you, I thought you would like that." Fletcher could not speak past the lump in his throat. He just nodded and leaned down to kiss his wife's forehead, then very carefully pressed a kiss to his son's tiny head. "Thomas Zimmerman," he said when he could finally talk. "Welcome to the world, son." The months after Thomas's birth were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. Fletcher learned to change diapers and walk the floor with a crying baby, to function on interrupted sleep, to share Penelope's attention with this tiny, demanding new person. He learned the fierce protectiveness of a father, the terror of a baby's first fever, the joy of a child's first smile. Penelope, despite her own exhaustion, seemed to bloom into motherhood. She nursed Thomas and sang to him and somehow managed to still keep the household running. Fletcher marveled at her strength, at how she gave so much of herself without ever seeming depleted. The ranch continued to grow. With the income from their cattle sales and Fletcher's careful management, they were able to purchase more land adjacent to their original property. They invested in better breeding stock and expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. Tommy and Pete remained loyal employees, but Fletcher also hired a third hand, a young man named David, who proved to be hardworking and trustworthy. When Thomas was 18 months old, Penelope became pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier despite her still having to manage an active toddler. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, a tiny thing with her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. They named her Sarah, after Penelope's mother, Fletcher held his daughter for the first time with shaking hands, awed by her delicate beauty. Thomas toddled over to see his new sister, patting her head with chubby hands and announcing baby with great satisfaction. Watching his family, Fletcher felt his heart might burst from the fullness of it. Life fell into new rhythms. The children grew, bringing chaos and joy in equal measure. Thomas proved to be adventurous and fearless, keeping Penelope constantly alert to prevent disasters. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a stubborn streak that Fletcher recognized as pure Morrison determination. The ranch prospered. Fletcher's reputation as an honest dealer and a skilled rancher spread through the territory. They were able to hire more help, build a proper bunkhouse for the hands, and invest in improving their stock. The small cabin that had seemed so adequate when Fletcher bought the property was expanded twice more, becoming a proper house with a parlor and a real kitchen and bedrooms for the children. But despite their growing prosperity, Fletcher and Penelope never forgot their humble beginnings. Penelope continued her habit of helping those in need, though now she did it with Fletcher's full support and from a position of being able to afford generosity. They donated food to families struggling through hard times, hired men who were down on their luck and gave them a chance to prove themselves, and supported the church and school in town. When Thomas was 5 years old, Penelope achieved one of her long-held dreams. The teacher at the Provo school retired, and Penelope was offered the position. She hesitated, unsure about taking time away from the ranch and the children, but Fletcher encouraged her. "You have wanted this for so long," he said. "We can manage. Sarah will come to school with you, and Thomas is old enough to start his education anyway. You should do this, Penelope. You are meant to teach." So Penelope became the school teacher, driving into town each morning with the children and returning in the afternoons. She threw herself into the work with characteristic energy, transforming the one-room schoolhouse into a place of genuine learning and warmth. She had a gift for teaching, able to reach even the most reluctant students with her patience and creativity. Fletcher was proud of her, though he missed her presence at the ranch during the day. But seeing how fulfilled she was, how she glowed when she talked about her students and their progress, he knew it was the right decision. And the evenings and weekends when they were all together at the ranch were precious, time they all treasured. The years passed in a blur of children growing, seasons changing, and the ranch continuing to thrive. They had 2 more children, another son they named Henry, born in 1884, and finally a daughter named Margaret in 1887. The house rang with the sounds of childhood, laughter and arguments and running feet. Fletcher built a larger barn and purchased more land. Penelope continued teaching, taking breaks only for the births and returning as soon as she was able. They faced challenges too. A drought in 1886 tested them severely, forcing difficult decisions about the herd and their resources. Henry nearly died from pneumonia the winter he turned 2, and Penelope and Fletcher took turns sitting up with him through long, terrifying nights. They weathered these storms together, their love deepening with each shared hardship. One evening in the summer of 1890, Fletcher and Penelope sat on the porch of their house watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 11, was teaching 7-year-old Sarah to throw a rope. Henry, 6, and Margaret, 3, were building something elaborate in the dirt with sticks and stones. "You remember that first day?" Penelope asked softly, leaning against Fletcher's shoulder. "When you saw me give away those coins," Fletcher smiled, putting his arm around her. "Every detail. I remember thinking I had never seen anyone with a kinder heart. I remember wanting to know you, wanting to be part of whatever light you carried inside you. I remember being shocked that a stranger would care," Penelope said. I had been feeling so alone, so lost. And then there you were, saying my kindness deserved kindness back. You changed my life that day, Fletcher Zimmerman. We changed each other's lives, Fletcher corrected gently. You gave me everything I did not know I was looking for, a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me love. Penelope turned to kiss him, a soft kiss full of 12 years of shared life. I love you, she said simply. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The stream murmured its eternal song, the cattle lowed contentedly in the pasture, and the mountains stood watch over it all, solid and enduring. Fletcher thought about that day in 1878, about a desperate young woman giving away her last coins and a cowboy deciding to show her kindness in return. He thought about all the moments that had led from that first meeting to this perfect evening, all the choices and chances and small miracles that had woven their lives together. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? Penelope asked, tilting her head to look at him. For giving away those coins, for having the kind of heart that sees others' needs above your own, for saying yes when I asked to court you, and yes when I asked you to marry me, for building this life with me, for every single day we have had together. Penelope's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. I would do it all again, she said. Every single choice, every moment, because they all led me to you, to this, to our family. I would not change a single thing. They kissed again as the sky darkened and the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them on their wedding night all those years ago. Their children's laughter floated on the evening air, and Fletcher felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. This was what mattered. Not wealth or status or anything the world might measure as success. This, a good woman's love, healthy children, honest work, and a place to call home, this was everything. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious and hardworking like his father, but with his mother's compassionate heart. He took over more and more of the ranch work, proving himself capable and trustworthy. Sarah inherited her mother's love of learning and announced at 15 that she intended to become a teacher like Penelope. Henry showed an affinity for horses that surpassed even Fletcher's skill, and Margaret, the baby of the family, proved to have a talent for drawing and painting. Penelope continued teaching until 1895, when she finally retired to focus on the ranch and her own children's education. She had spent 15 years shaping young minds in Provo, and the town honored her with a special ceremony, testimonials from former students bringing her to tears. Fletcher gradually handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Thomas, though he remained active and involved. He and Penelope had more time together now, time to sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun set, time to take long walks along the stream, time to simply enjoy each other's company without the constant demands of work and young children. They talked often about those early days, marveling at how quickly they had fallen in love, how certain they had been despite knowing each other for such a short time. They never regretted it, never wished they had waited or been more cautious. Sometimes they agreed, you just knew. And they had known. In 1898, Thomas married a young woman named Elizabeth from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was a joyous affair, held at the church in Provo with a celebration afterward at the ranch. Fletcher and Penelope welcomed Elizabeth into the family with open arms, and Penelope was especially pleased to gain a daughter-in-law who shared her values and work ethic. Thomas and Elizabeth built a house on the ranch property, and the following year they gave Fletcher and Penelope their first grandchild, a boy they named Fletcher after his grandfather. Holding his namesake for the first time, Fletcher felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that moved him deeply. Sarah went to the university in Salt Lake City to study education, the first in their family to pursue higher education. Fletcher and Penelope were immensely proud, though they missed her terribly. She returned to teach in Provo, eventually taking over her mother's former position at the school. Henry started his own horse breeding program on a section of the ranch land, developing a reputation for quality stock. And Margaret, to everyone's surprise, moved to San Francisco to study art, sending home beautiful paintings and cheerful letters about city life. As the new century dawned in 1900, Fletcher and Penelope found themselves entering their later years surrounded by love and legacy. The ranch they had built together spanned thousands of acres now, a thriving enterprise that employed dozens of people and supported multiple families. But more than that, they had built something less tangible but infinitely more valuable. A family rooted in love and kindness, children and grandchildren who carried forward the values they held dear. One spring evening in 1905, Fletcher and Penelope celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. All their children and grandchildren had gathered at the ranch for the occasion, filling the house with noise and laughter. After supper, after the toasts and the cake and the presents, after the grandchildren had been put to bed, and the younger generation had settled into their own conversations, Fletcher and Penelope slipped away to walk along the stream as they had done so many times before. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. They walked hand in hand, their steps slower than they once were but no less sure. They did not talk much, having reached the point in their marriage where words were often unnecessary, where silence was comfortable, and communication could happen without speech. Finally, they stopped at the spot where Fletcher had first brought Penelope to see the property, where he had told her he could not picture his life without her in it. The cabin they had shared that first night was still there, though it was used for storage now, with Thomas and Elizabeth living in the newer house and Fletcher and Penelope in the main house. "You remember?" Fletcher asked softly. "Every moment," Penelope replied. "I remember being so nervous, knowing I should not be here alone with you but unable to resist. I remember the way you looked at me, like I was something precious. I remember feeling for the first time since my mother died that I had found where I belonged." Fletcher turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. At 61, Penelope's hair was more gray than auburn now, and time had left its marks on her face. But to Fletcher, she was just as beautiful as the young woman who had given away her last coins on a dusty street in Provo 27 years ago. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said. "And I am still the luckiest man alive that you said yes to me." Penelope smiled, the same warm smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. "We have had a good life, have we not? Better than I ever dreamed was possible." "The best life," Fletcher agreed, "and I would not change a single moment of it." They stood there by the stream, holding hands under the stars, two people who had built something lasting and true from a single act of kindness and the courage to follow their hearts. They had weathered every storm together, celebrated every joy together, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As they walked back to the house, Fletcher thought about that young cowboy he had been, alone and searching for something he could not name. He thought about the desperate young woman giving away her last coins because hungry children needed them more than she did. He thought about how a single moment of compassion had changed everything, had set in motion a lifetime of love and purpose. "Your kindness deserved kindness back," he murmured, Repeating the words he had spoken to her that first day, Penelope squeezed his hand. "And you gave me so much more than kindness. You gave me everything." They reached the house, warm light spilling from the windows, the sounds of their family inside. Their children's laughter, grandchildren's sleepy murmurs, the comfortable conversation of people who loved each other. This was their legacy, Fletcher thought. Not the land or the cattle or the material wealth they had accumulated. This, a family built on love and kindness, on two people who had been brave enough to trust what their hearts told them was true. The years that followed were gentle ones. Fletcher and Penelope settled fully into the rhythms of later life, content to let Thomas manage the ranch while they enjoyed their grandchildren and each other. They took pride in watching their children live their own lives, make their own choices, build their own families and careers. Sarah married a fellow teacher in 1907, and they had twin daughters who delighted Penelope beyond measure. Henry married in 1908, bringing another daughter-in-law into the family, a sweet-natured woman who loved horses almost as much as he did. Even Margaret eventually came home from San Francisco, bringing with her a husband she had met at the art school and settling in Salt Lake City, where she opened her own gallery. The grandchildren multiplied, each one a new wonder. Fletcher and Penelope welcomed each birth with joy, marveling at how their single union had created this sprawling, loving family. They were gentle grandparents, spoiling the children shamelessly, telling them stories and teaching them the values that had guided their own lives. In 1910, Fletcher and Penelope celebrated their 32nd anniversary. Fletcher was 67 now, still strong but moving slower, his hair completely white. Penelope was 65, her hands showing the arthritis that came with age but her spirit as bright as ever. They celebrated quietly this time, just the two of them, with a simple dinner and an evening on the porch. 32 years, Penelope marveled. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday. "I know exactly what you mean," Fletcher said, holding her hand as they rocked gently in their chairs. "Has it been everything you hoped for?" Penelope was quiet for a moment, considering. "It has been more," she said finally. "So much more than I knew how to hope for. When I gave away those coins that day, I had nothing. I was alone and scared and did not know how I would survive. And then you appeared, like an answer to prayers I did not know how to pray. You gave me not just kindness but love, not just a meal but a home, not just companionship but a family. You gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined." Fletcher felt his eyes grow damp, something that happened more easily these days. "You gave me just as much. You gave me purpose and meaning. You made me want to be better, to build something that mattered. You made me believe in goodness and love and hope. You made me whole." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set once again behind the mountains, as it had set thousands of times since that first evening they had sat together. The stream still murmured its eternal song, the cattle still grazed in the meadow, and the mountains still stood watch. Some things never changed, but so much had changed too. The wild west of their youth was fading into memory and legend. Utah had become a state in 1896. The railroad had brought civilization and connection. The rough frontier town where Fletcher had first seen Penelope was now a proper city with electric lights and telephone lines. The world was moving faster, changing in ways they sometimes struggled to understand. But here on their ranch, surrounded by their family and the land they loved, Fletcher and Penelope had created something timeless. Love, they had learned, did not change with the times. Kindness never went out of style. Family was always what mattered most. In the fall of 1915, Fletcher fell ill. It was nothing dramatic, just a cold that settled into his chest and would not leave. Penelope nursed him carefully, but they both knew that at 72, such illnesses were more serious than they once would have been. Fletcher spent weeks in bed, coughing and weak, while Penelope read to him and held his hand and tried not to show her fear. He recovered, but slowly, and it left him frailer than he had been before. He could no longer ride or do much physical work. But he could sit on the porch and watch the ranch operate, could hold his great-grandchildren when they visited, could still share quiet evenings with Penelope. "I am not ready to leave you," he told her one evening, his voice rough from the lingering cough. "I do not know how to be without you." Penelope's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her voice steady. "You are not going anywhere yet, Fletcher Zimmerman. We still have time. We still have each other." And they did have time, precious years more of it. Fletcher regained some of his strength, though he never fully returned to his former vitality. But he and Penelope adapted as they always had, finding new ways to be together, new rhythms that accommodated the limitations of age. They spent hours on the porch, watching the world go by, talking or sitting in comfortable silence. They received visits from their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each visit a treasure. They tended Penelope's flower garden together, Fletcher doing the lighter tasks while Penelope directed and did the more delicate work. On quiet evenings, Penelope would read aloud as she had done throughout their marriage, her voice now aged but still beautiful to Fletcher's ears. They reread favorite books, discovering new depths in familiar stories. They talked about their lives, remembering and marveling at how it had all unfolded. "We have been so blessed," Penelope would say often, and Fletcher always agreed. In the spring of 1920, Fletcher and Penelope celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary. Their entire family gathered at the ranch for the occasion, 3 generations filling the house and yard. Someone had taken photographs, a newer custom that still seemed magical to Fletcher and Penelope. They posed for a family portrait, Fletcher and Penelope seated in chairs with their children standing behind them, and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren arranged in rows in front. Looking at that photograph later, Fletcher was struck by what they had created. All these people, these lives, had stemmed from one cowboy noticing a young woman's act of kindness and deciding to respond in kind. Every person in that picture existed because he and Penelope had been brave enough to trust their hearts. That summer was beautiful, warm but not too hot, with enough rain to keep everything green. Fletcher spent his days on the porch, watching the ranch operate, greeting visitors, playing with the youngest great-grandchildren who would climb into his lap and demand stories. One evening in late August, he and Penelope sat watching the sunset as they had done countless times before. The sky was particularly beautiful that night, streaked with pink and gold and purple. "It is almost too lovely," Penelope whispered. "Days like this, I almost cannot bear how beautiful life is." Fletcher squeezed her hand. "I know what you mean. Sometimes the beauty is so big it hurts." They sat quietly, holding hands, watching the colors slowly fade from the sky. Fletcher felt a deep peace settle over him, a sense of completion. He had lived a good life. He had loved and been loved. He had built something lasting. He was ready for whatever came next. "Penelope," he said softly, "if something should happen to me, I want you to know that every moment with you has been a gift. You made my life worth living. You gave me everything." Penelope turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. "Nothing is going to happen to you. We still have time." But Fletcher could feel the truth in his bones. His time was coming, sooner rather than later. He did not fear it exactly, but he grieved for what he would be leaving behind, for the time he would not have with Penelope and their family. "Promise me something," he said. Promise me you will keep living, keep finding joy, keep being your kind, generous self. Do not let grief close you off. Fletcher, stop. You are scaring me. I am not trying to scare you, my love. I just need you to promise. Can you do that? Penelope was crying now, but she nodded. I promise. But you have to promise me something too. Promise you will fight. Promise you will stay with me as long as you can. I promise, Fletcher said, as long as I possibly can. 2 days later, Fletcher passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 77 years old and had lived to see 42 years of marriage to the woman he loved, 4 children grown and thriving, 11 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. He died in the house he had built, on the land he had claimed, surrounded by love. Penelope was heartbroken but not destroyed. She kept her promise to Fletcher, choosing to celebrate the life they had shared rather than being consumed by grief. She lived 7 more years, remaining active and engaged, continuing to be the center of her sprawling family. She told stories about Fletcher to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had never known him or had known him only briefly. She talked about that first day, about seeing each other and knowing about the life they had built from a single act of kindness. He saw me give away my last coins, she would say, her aged eyes still bright with memory. And he said my kindness deserved kindness back, but he gave me so much more than kindness. He gave me everything that mattered. Penelope passed away in her sleep in 1927 at the age of 82. She was laid to rest beside Fletcher in the small cemetery outside Provo, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and dates and a single inscription. Together in life, together in eternity. Their children inherited the ranch, which continued to thrive for generations. The main house was preserved and passed down through the family, and the story of Fletcher and Penelope became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The small cabin where they had spent their first night as husband and wife was eventually restored and maintained as a family shrine of sorts, a place where descendants could go to feel connected to their roots. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light was just right, people swore they could hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of loving conversation, the sound of 2 people who had found in each other everything they needed. The story of Fletcher and Penelope lived on in their descendants, in the values they had instilled, and the legacy of kindness they had created. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren learned about the cowboy, who had seen a young woman's act of compassion and decided to show her kindness in return. They learned about the love that had grown from that single moment, the life that had been built on a foundation of mutual respect and deep affection. And sometimes, when members of the Zimmerman family faced their own moments of choice, their own chances to show kindness or walk away, they would remember their ancestors. They would remember that a single act of compassion could change everything, that love could grow in unexpected ways, and that the most important things in life were not wealth or status but family, kindness, and the courage to follow your heart. The ranch still stands today, though much changed from Fletcher's time. But the mountains are the same, the stream still runs clear, and the values that Fletcher and Penelope lived by continue to guide their descendants. Their love story, born on a dusty street in 1878 when a cowboy saw a young woman give away her last coins and decided to show her that kindness deserved kindness back, remains as powerful and true as the day it began. It is a reminder that the smallest acts of compassion can have the most profound consequences, that love is worth the risk, and that a life built on kindness and genuine connection is the richest life of all. Fletcher and Penelope proved that you do not need grand gestures or perfect circumstances to build something beautiful. You just need an open heart, the courage to act on what you know is right, and someone who sees you for who you truly are and loves you for it. Their story is one of hope and possibility, of two lonely people finding each other against all odds and creating a legacy that would endure for generations. It is a testament to the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the truth that sometimes the best things in life begin with the simplest gesture of human decency. In the end, Fletcher was right that first day when he saw Penelope give away her last coins. Her kindness did deserve kindness back. But what he could not have known then was that his act of kindness in return would lead to a lifetime of love, a family that would span generations, and a legacy that would inspire countless others to choose compassion over indifference, connection over isolation, and love over fear. That is the real magic of their story. Not that they fell in love quickly, or that they built a successful ranch, or even that they lived long, full lives together. The magic is in the simple truth that when you see someone in need and choose to help, when you recognize kindness and honor it, when you open your heart to possibility, everything can change. One moment of compassion can ripple outward in ways you never imagine, touching lives you will never meet, creating beauty and love and hope for generations to come. And that is the legacy of Fletcher Zimmerman and Penelope Morrison, the cowboy and the kind-hearted young woman who gave away her last coins. They showed that love is real, that kindness matters, and that the most extraordinary lives can grow from the most ordinary moments. All you have to do is have the courage to see the opportunity, the generosity to act on it, and the wisdom to recognize love when it finds you. Their love story, born on a hot summer day in 1878 in Provo, Utah Territory, when a cowboy saw her giving away her last coins and said, "Your kindness deserves kindness back," remains a shining example of what is possible when we choose to lead with our hearts, when we value people over possessions, and when we have the courage to believe in love at first sight and the commitment to nurture that love every day for the rest of our lives. It is a story worth remembering, worth retelling, and worth living by.